Welcome to the summit, The Art of Living. And I now have the pleasure to introduce you to Stephen Linsteadt. Hi, Stephen.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
And you are an author, you're a poet, and you're a painter. And we'll be talking about painting today. And you're also the founder of Scalar Heart Connection. Can you briefly mention what that is?
Scalar Heart Connection is a process that helps us to tap into the wisdom of our own heart. And the heart is tapped in or connected to that quantum field of unlimited intelligence. And we can utilize that to help guide us through any problems that we're having. Oftentimes these problems arise from childhood traumas, and it really helps us to reconnect with that wisdom to help guide us through those issues and bring us back to that creative joy of creativity that we're going to be talking about today.
Great, yeah, you're very creative, and with your paintings too, and you have a painting right behind you.
Well, maybe I can just start with that whole idea of creativity coming from that field that the heart is connected to. Leonardo da Vinci said that all great art masterpieces, in his opinion, came when the spirit is working with the hand. In other words, at the end of our brush, if we can focus our attention on that creative spirit that is guiding us, and I think that is where the art of silence comes in. It's listening to the creative spirit and being guided by that as we go through the canvas. I tend personally to work from subjects, but I feel like it's the process that is really what is important. And the process is, how do we open ourselves to receiving those impulses of creativity from that creative field? But the subject usually is like the place to start. And the painting behind me, the subject started out as being coral. And I'm very passionate about the bleaching and the dyeing of the ocean's coral and really humans' involvement or participation in both creating the problem and perhaps not moving fast enough to resolve it. So I've been painting some ocean scenes. I've been painting other environmental scenes that my idea is to bring awareness to these issues. So that becomes my subject, but it's really, how does that subject evolve? I don't necessarily go into the canvas and say, okay, well, here's where the coral is going to be and here's where that's going to be. It just flows spontaneously. The color decisions, the brush strokes, those are all what I hope are guided by that creative field, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it comes out of the silence.
Yeah, so it comes out of the silence, but behind the silence is the everything. It's the source of our existence. And I think that on one hand, I tap into that field, helping other people with problems in life. But I think that creative field, what it wants more than anything is to see us happy and joyful and creative. So I think that the natural expression of nature is to be joyful and creative. I moved to Brazil a couple of years ago, and I've been very inspired by the vegetation here. I moved here from the Mojave Desert. So it used to be, when I looked outside my studio, I had like a couple sage bushes. But now when I look out, I have an infinite variety of trees and vines and everything you can imagine. And I can just see that creative spirit working through nature, and it must have had such joy and happiness in seeing how many trees that it could create, how many varieties of animals and birds it could create. So I want to be an extension of that. You know, Marc Chagall said that art really takes off from where nature ends. And I encourage people to really pick up a piece of paper or a canvas and draw or paint. Just make things with your hands. There's no, I think as soon as we start to judge what we're doing with our mind, I think that's when all the joy gets sucked out of the canvas. So I encourage people to just really experience that joy through art I think it's extremely therapeutic, and it's a way that I come into the studio every day because of that sense of joy that I get in doing the process. It's just an overwhelming sense of joy that drives me to paint almost every day if I can.
Yeah, I see the joy, and it's creative and spontaneous. And what about the mind? Does the mind come in and try to direct the process?
I went to art school, so I have an academic classic training in art, and that gives you the skill sets, I would say, to understand color, to understand brush strokes, to understand line and form and all these things and composition. So the mind does come in. The mind comes in, and it's like you make a red brush stroke, and then your mind says, okay, well, what color should the next brush stroke be? So there is that interplay of the mind, which is quite interesting, because in your decision making of what color or where to put the color does come that critical mind, does come the judgment. So it's like a play back and forth between that, the mind's looking at the skill of it, or the characteristic of the line, but at the same time allowing yourself to be spontaneous enough that you don't overthink it. So it's kind of a balance between the two. For me personally, I learn a lot every time I paint, because I do make a mark, and then I criticize it, or I say, well, no, that didn't work out. And then I paint over it, or I scrape it off. And oftentimes it's what's revealed underneath, the underpainting underneath ends up being so much better, so much more than what I could have done if I had planned it out ahead of time. So that's why I encourage mistakes. I scrape them out, or I paint over them. And there's always a bit of the underpainting that shows through. It's like a bit of your mistake shows through. And it enhances the painting beyond what I can even describe. You have to really be in front of the canvas to appreciate that. But it almost is analogous to our lives, where all the mistakes and all the problems and shortcomings that we've experienced through our lives, those all show through who we are today. And it adds such an enrichment to the character, the fabric of our lives and our being, that it's really liberating. It's really liberating to know I can just go to a canvas and be free to make mistakes. And I think that that's really a lesson for life, that we can be free to make mistakes and be who we are and just be joyful.
Yeah, and we have a tendency to correct and compare many times. And can we just be who we are? Exactly.
And when we do stumble, it's that stumble that brings depth to who we are, depth and more meaning to our existence. So there's nothing wrong with being imperfect. Just like all my paintings are imperfect.
Yeah, do you want to show your paintings?
I can. Well, let's see how this works. I'll pick up the camera and I can do a quick tour around the studio. And yeah, let's see what that looks like.
Yeah, that's good. Good.
So here we go.
Yeah.
Try and be gentle. So from here, I wanted to show you, this is sort of an overview of the studio looking out towards the entrance door. So it looks like I'm doing a 360 here.
Yeah, and you can
over there. I tend to store them over here. And this is the painting that I just showed you.
Yeah. Oh, it's a big painting.
It's 6 feet by 7 feet. And I want to bring you right in. I don't know if is it still in focus?
Yes, it is.
And I wanted you to see how things show through from underneath that really add a certain vibrance, I think, to the painting.
Colorful.
I'm going to walk over here. This is one of the first ones. I'm kind of approaching it now. Yeah. So this painting is an underwater scene also, and it's has a bit of a connection to COVID and the pandemic and the isolation that people have been experiencing. And also, I'm just trying to bring a little bit of light to the idea that our human situation on the outside has a lot to do with how we treat nature. And here is my octopus that just kind of came out of nowhere. Somehow the painting wanted to have an octopus. So I'm going to take you and show you a little bit of Brazil out the window.
Oh, yes.
This painting I set out to be inspired by the Brazilian landscape. And the idea was I was trying to just paint without thinking too much about it. Although I knew I wanted to paint foliage and trees.
Nature.
And nature is such a great inspiration. And I'm taking you out to another outdoor view. And one of my favorite parts about this studio is not only the size of it, but here's my favorite chandelier.
Nice studio.
I'm going to walk you back to the canvas.
That is nice. So colorful.
I like to, since I'm painting images that have to do with sort of an environmental catastrophe, if you will, that's not very hopeful. So I'm trying to be a little bit hopeful about it with the brightness of color to interject a certain hope for the future. So it's sometimes can be a disturbing scene, but if you paint it with a certain joy, so to say, I just feel like it's an inspiration for maybe the younger generation.
Yeah, you can tell there's joy and movement and texture, and it's very alive.
I'm also trying to, hopefully, if you tap into that creativity and that source of that creativity is joyful and is a field of love and joy, then I hope that some of that shows through the canvas, so that the observer also gets a sense of feeling that connection to that field. So that's why it's always hard for me to use dark colors, because I'm trying to speak to that field of joy.
Yeah, and you also write poetry, and I asked you to read a few poems about painting. Wonderful. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, the first one is titled "Painting with Turpentine and a Rag," and it's speaking to that whole idea of making mistakes and just wiping it out and starting over again. So it goes, the first brush stroke on a blank canvas, that great hesitation, where reason is abandoned long enough to allow reflexes to have their way and the brush to choose its own palette. The fear lies in subsequent interpretations, the lingering sense of judgment. Brushstrokes are vulnerable when they're left alone. The temptation is to mold drops and splashes into houses or trees, something conforming, recognizable by an imaginary audience. So I scrape out the childish scene with turpentine and a rag and start over. When I close my eyes and paint in the dark, the canvas fills with possibilities. Brushstrokes sing in fluid vermilion and crimson, the stops and starts. The delicate strokes and the heavy ones keep time to the harmony of that moment and only that moment. And another canvas is waiting.
Ah, another canvas is waiting. Okay. So it's like, next painting, next painting. Paint all of your life, right?
Well, you can, because there's always another idea, and there's always an imperfection in the painting. And so you want to, well, okay, maybe I'll try it again and see if I can get it right this time.
Oh, get it right. Yes.
Get it right. Well, hopefully I never get it right, and I probably never will.
Yeah, and what is right? What is right?
It's the joy of trying. Just it's really the joy of the process.
Get it right.
I mean, I don't see nature ever making that judgment. You know, nature makes all kinds of wild creatures and wild things, and and there it is. You have to accept the whole of it.
Poems about painting.
Self-portrait. I pretend to know who I am, but the accidents in paint have their own proposals, forcing me to adopt a new context. I paint until I can no longer find myself. Consciousness parades in pigment like ticker tape through Dante's dark wood. Each brushstroke a different fragment, a nuance of emotions repressed. Each line a new revelation, a mystic curve or splash, continually renewing myself at the end of the brush. I tend to hide behind the canvas, putting myself back together without the lies. The more I paint, the less I know.
Yeah, the unknown, the silence.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, in the process, the unknown becomes known.
Francis Bacon, the painter Francis Bacon, said that each painting adds to the mystery. And I thought that was interesting, because you would think that the more you paint, the more the mystery would be illuminated. It's like the more you would learn about the mystery every time you painted. But what I think he's saying, I don't know if that's what he meant, but for me, what that means is that every time I paint, I'm exploring deeper and deeper parts of myself. And so the mystery of who I am just gets deeper and deeper and deeper.
Ah, yeah, like
Life, living life through the silence. That silence is that mysterious field of who we are, that we're trying to illuminate who we are. But I guess we have to work through all the parts of us that we're not. Our ego has created this sense of ourself. And that's the part that we have to deconstruct in order to get to who we really are. And so for me, painting is just another way of examining all those pieces and making decisions of what pieces I want to keep and what pieces I need to let go of. And mostly I find that the process is really one of letting go of everything we thought we were, so that something else totally new can emerge.
so it's like the quote about the master who's making this beautiful masterpiece and putting the whole heart, everything into it, all the attention, and then just letting go of it when it's done. No grasping onto it or expectations. You're just in the process as it's happening.
And honestly, it's very challenging to want to paint and have the painting be known or recognized, to have it be in a gallery and to sell to some collector. But I think as soon as you start painting for the applause of the art market, I think you're doomed, because then you just sort of lock out that whole freshness, that whole creativity. So yeah, it's not only the process of making the art that you have to let go of expectations, but everything leading up to it, including what do you do with it at the end of it. I do share my work. I do have a gallery here in Sao Paulo that represents my work, but you can't allow how your art is received or not received to influence what you're doing.
yeah, when you find it joyful, your heart is naturally in it. It's love.
I think that for me, painting is one way of expressing creativity, but everybody has their own way of tapping into that creativity within themselves. And ultimately, I'm striving so that my whole life is a creative process, that every day is something new. I'm looking at something new. I'm creating something new just in my relationships with others or how I look at the world or approach the world. So I think that, I think that we are naturally creative beings and we should honor that every day. And it can be anything, any, like I said, just preparing lunch can be a creative act.
Yeah, daily life.
Daily life, yeah.
Yeah.
I just like the smell of turpentine. So for me, I want to come and paint. I want to have, that's just the way I respond to that creative field.
Yeah. Yeah, and you also have other creative outlets like your books and poetry.
Yeah, I do have those other creative outlets. Nothing gives me as much joy as painting. So.
Yeah. I also paint a little bit myself.
Oh, good.
Not on big canvas like that.
Can't judge it.
Yeah. I could paint on my walls, but I don't know. I thought about it, but and what's your website so people can find your paintings?
StephenLinsteadStudio.com.
Yeah, and other.
Instagram and at Stephen Linsteadt Studio.
Yeah. And the website for the Scalar Heart Connection?
ScalarHeartConnection.com is the website for Scalar Heart Connection, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.